Welcome to the Fit Dad Nation podcast, forging strong fathers and raising a stronger generation. It's time to get up or shut up with your host, Steve Roy.
Hey guys, this is Steve Roy, host of the Fit Dad Nation podcast. Welcome to the show. Thank you for listening. So before I introduce today's guest, I want to invite all you dads who are listening right now and are ready to start taking action on reclaiming your health and your fitness and becoming better fathers, better men, to join our free online community. The best way to do that is to apply to our free private Facebook group, which can be found at fitdadnation.com/community. So, I'm really excited to be talking with my guest today. His name is Dr. Shawn Baker. He's an orthopedic surgeon, an international speaker, podcast host. He's the CEO of MeatRx and the author of the Carnivore Diet. So he's been featured on numerous mainstream media channels, including a great interview with Joe Rogan. And he's one of the people largely responsible for this whole carnivore movement that seems to be everywhere on social media. So thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Baker.
Yeah, hey, it's my pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So I've been looking forward to this. I've been actually following your stuff for a while. First I was like, what the hell is this carnivore diet? I mean, can you really just eat only meat, right? So I started really kind of digging into your videos on YouTube and Instagram and some of your bigger podcasts and shows, and it's really kind of piqued my interest. And so I'm really curious to kind of see how you, as a doctor, you were in the military, you're a surgeon, ended up getting hooked up with this approach to eating, and then ultimately how you turned it into this whole, really, carnivore movement.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I'm 53 now, and when I was probably, 42, 43, I've been a lifetime athlete and trained hard my whole life, and I found that despite training hard, I was starting to get sick. I was heavier than I wanted to be. Part of it was because of the sports I was competing at, but as I got tired of, changing those sports, then I decided I needed to get leaner, and I played with diets, a whole bunch of different diets, in fact, and lost, something like 50, 60 pounds in a course of about 3 months, got leaner, looked to do this sort of long-term and found that I couldn't sustain these low-fat diets, and so I went through a whole progression of different iterations, types of diets, going from, kind of a low-fat, high-fiber approach, vegetable-heavy, lean meat diet, to a more diet based in higher fats, low carb, and eventually ended up on a ketogenic diet for several years, and then found a bunch of people doing this kind of all-meat approach, and I thought that sounded just kind of interesting, and so I tried it out myself for 30 days, and after I kind of observed it for about a year and dabbled here and there, a couple of days here, a couple of days there, and then finally went for a 30-day deal, and quite honestly just noted significant improvements in my quality of life, my health, both subjectively and objectively, better athletic performance, better strength, better body composition, really everything got better. And then I kind of continued doing that for, several years now close to 3.5 years. And along the way, other people took notice, and a lot of people were critical of it. Some people tried. Most of the people that have tried found similar results. And I think it's kind of turned into this little bit of this movement, which is growing, kind of by the day. It's not a day goes by where I don't get a half dozen to, a dozen or more people telling me that their lives have been completely changed for the better. Chronic health conditions have gone away. They've gotten off medications, so on and so forth. And so we continue to see this, this movement evolve. We're learning more. We're getting some formal research done, which I think is much needed. And I think we're going from the realm of this is crazy to this seems to be an effective dietary strategy for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons.
Sure. So, obviously from the name carnivore, we can kind of figure out what it is, but what exactly is the carnivore diet? What exactly are we allowed to eat?
Yeah, well, I mean, many people take it literally to eat just only meat or only animal products. And I think there's certainly people that do well with it, and certainly some people that for whatever reason tend to need to do that. I tend to define it as a diet that focuses on animal animal-based nutrition, which, you either eliminate or limit plant material as you need to in order to obtain health. And so that means there's some people that, might include some plants in the diet as they tolerate. I think it's something that I'm not overly dogmatic at. The longer I go at this, I think, it's important to recognize and do what actually works for people rather than what you think should work for them. And I think for many people, as we see that the standard American diet is a plant-based diet as it currently is formulated now. Granted, to be fair, most of the plants in the standard American diet are things like sugar, which comes from a plant, seed oils, which obviously are plant-based, and then highly refined grain products, which also are plant-based. So we have this belief that animal products are bad for us. I think that there's a lot of nuance behind that, and I don't think we, quite understand the whole picture.
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the things that I admire about your approach is, you're not on social pushing something, you're not hyping something. This isn't sales driven like most of what we see online, where there's always an agenda. The keto diet has obviously become famous for that, where everyone and their brother is promoting it as an expert, and it's people making millions of dollars selling it. And you're not a typical social media, we'll call it influencer. Obviously, you have a lot of influence, but you have a very engaged audience, a very active community. But you're a real medical professional. You're an MD. You have real credentials. You're not a schmuck that is just trying to make a few bucks. You're just sharing your experiences and some of your research. And yeah, I've seen it blow up. But again, like everybody else, I'm certainly not ready to jump on the bandwagon and say, this is the best way to eat. This makes so much sense. I love meat, but the thought of eating nothing but meat or close to it, just doesn't sound all that appetizing to me. And you're up against opposition every day, right? From obviously the plant-based community is at your heels constantly. I can see that. But it's everything we've been taught, right? 3 squares a day or 6 small meals to stoke your metabolism, right? All these things we're learning, high grains and dairy, and and you're saying that this is not necessarily what we need. Obviously, this country is getting fatter, not thinner, despite all of the resources we have, right? And so, yeah, so what you're doing is, it's we'll call it revolutionary. It's a very unique approach, and it's just so fascinating to me what you're doing.
Well, it certainly obviously flies in the face of conventional, nutritional thought, and the surprising thing is the results that so many people have gotten, by doing this. And I think if we go just strictly to what we know from biochemistry, not what we know from things like epidemiology, and not what we get from absorbing what people eat, because people would eat anything, anything that's available we eat, and not necessarily all just because we can eat it doesn't mean it's necessarily good for us. That goes back for hundreds and thousands of years. So, from a biochemical standpoint, we have essential requirements, which are basically amino acids, essential fats, minerals, and vitamins. And those things are all available in animal products in one form or the other. And you can get complete nutrition that way. And so, whereas carbohydrates are non-essential, although they conditionally can be beneficial, and I don't deny that certain people can use carbohydrates in a helpful fashion, that clearly can occur. I sort of say that sometimes the way the carbohydrates come packaged can be problematic, and that's the sort of the difference here, is that we recognize that all foods have potential pros and cons, and I think we have this sort of halo belief that you can eat as much fruits and vegetables without ever having any problems, and that's just not the case for some people. Other people do well that way, but some people certainly find that eliminating them. Like I said, I've got people that have come from a diet where they eat meat and greens, fruits and vegetables, and that's pretty much it. And then they remove the fruits and vegetables, and their health gets better. And it's hard to explain, but it does occur. And I think there's something to be said for recognizing that. Like I said, fortunately, we've got research that is actually underway, and that will help us to further recognize this as a viable eating pattern for some people for some period of time. Some people need to do it for 3-6 months to figure out things. I would posit that food plays a significant role in many health conditions. And, if we try to figure out what those foods are, it's very difficult when we're eating, 100 plus different food items. And so when you limit it to something that clearly humans can live on, and arguably quite healthily, then we can kind of solve what those things are. And then, you kind of maybe later on are able to add different things in to see where you fit.
Okay. So you're largely eating meat and eggs, obviously poultry and fish, but also like cheese, butter, heavy cream, those things are all on the menu?
I draw a pretty cautious line with dairy in general. I think that some people will tolerate it better. I think I'm pretty quick to pull the trigger in saying that dairy can be problematic. And so I personally do better without dairy. So I do use it from time to time. But if truth be told, I would say that, the less dairy I personally consume, the better I tend to do. So I certainly don't just tell people not to do it, but I'd say it's something you just have to kind of test. There are some people that I think a basic human physiologic capacity is to be able to digest and absorb nutrition from meat. I think almost all people have that. Some people through disease state kind of lose some of that capacity, I think, or have to have some time to adjust to it. But I think, this is something that we can all do. And then I think beyond that, some of these other foods that were kind of novel to the human palate, including dairy and grains and even certain vegetables which we created are, dependent upon when you're exposed to them. So obviously there are whole swaths of the world's population that are lactose intolerant. Whereas Scandinavians, Northern Europeans have had it in their diet longer and they seem to tolerate it better. And so I think you just have to kind of find what you tolerate from a non-meat source, is where there's some variation there.
It's essentially an elimination diet or an extreme elimination diet. When we see all the problems with lactose and gluten and everything else. And I'm actually a big fan of Mark Sisson and his primal movement, and he's big into the ketogenic diet. And I feel great when I eliminate grains, white flour, even dairy. Like I just notice a huge difference in my energy and like heartburn and just how I feel. And so, in looking at some of your testimonials, I mean, that's one of the recurring themes is people are just not having these normal issues that we have because, we're stuffing our faces with Doritos and McDonald's and soda. And we're going to feel like shit all the time because of all that garbage. And we know this, but, obviously we're not doing enough about it, because like I said, you already know this, we're getting fatter as a country, not thinner. And so, it's just amazing how much food plays into how we just feel on a day-to-day basis. And there's a lot to be said just for feeling good. Like, I've heard it said, we have no idea how good we're supposed to feel because very few of us actually are doing those things where we're at our best.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us, particularly as we get older, sort of take feeling not so good as sort of typical normal aging. I think the fact that, and I think it's a dad thing. We have that dad bod where we have that kind of, big belly and, we just kind of lose interest in a lot of things. We have back pain, knee pain, joint pain. We kind of accept that. We accept poor quality of life is kind of normal, and we don't feel like we did when we were 20. And I think that's something that is unfortunate that we've kind of normalized that. And I think that in a lot of cases it doesn't have to be that way. I know, personally, and I know that many people that I've now thousands of people will say they literally feel 20, 30 years younger when they go on this diet. I think that's remarkable.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So, the ketogenic diet, is not new either, but it's, in the last handful of years, we've seen it blow up in popularity. So what are some of the main differences? Because ultimately we're restricting or virtually eliminating carbohydrates on both. What are the main differences between the carnivore and the keto?
Yeah, well, a ketogenic diet, classically, and the ketogenic diet is evolving. I think people are learning that they're including more animal products in that. But a ketogenic diet classically has been very fat-based diet that kind of somewhat restricted protein. It was something where the goal was to be in ketosis, which is, a state of having a certain amount of ketones circulating in the blood, basically at all times or most of the time. And carnivore diet, we're not really focused on how many ketones we produce or how long we're in ketosis or if we're in ketosis. Carnivore diets tend to be, obviously, meat-based, whereas a ketogenic diet could be, mostly salad. There's a lot of people that, they eat a lot of vegetation on a ketogenic diet, which, is, good or bad. That's debatable.
Yep.
And I think with a carnivore diet, again, protein is a much higher amount. So we're seeing where a ketogenic diet, they may be getting 15% of their calories from protein, which is pretty similar to the average American diet, standard American diet. And they just shift the carbohydrate and fat and macronutrient around, significantly. Where a carnivore diet, we're seeing a lot more protein in the diet, and I think that is, has some positive benefits in general, on health. Is I think we tend to eat too little protein in our Western diet.
Oh, for sure. So is it more like maybe almost like a 50-50 split between fat and protein? Somewhere in there?
It can be on a gram per gram basis. And, when you look at a caloric, content, that changes that a little bit. So, obviously fat has more calories per gram. But yeah, for many people, that's a pretty sort of maintenance level. That'd be kind of, like an egg would be. An egg would be about a 50-50 mix. Same thing with things like, like maybe a fattier cut of meat where you'd see 50-50%, percent protein versus fat. So that's pretty typical for most people.
Okay. And so I'm sure, and actually I know you answer these individual questions all the time, which is great because, the first thing that comes to my mind is, how is this sustainable? Given the fact that the vast majority of us are eating 40, 50, 60 or more percent of our calories from carbohydrates, and then to just turn it off and not have any. Obviously there's a transition period, the carb flu, or, you feel like death for a little while, or, that's what comes to my mind is when you just go cold turkey. And I don't know if you recommend that, but, we're so used to eating all of this processed food and all these heavy carbohydrates and starches and then just taking them out. Seems like it would just send your body into some kind of crazy, what the hell is going on shock.
Yeah, there's definitely an adaptation period. And for some people, that can be challenging. They do have a lot of symptoms, whether it's keto flu or, when you go from a transition from sort of switching the primary macronutrient for energy. I often will talk about, I have a book out here where we talk about how to transition. And I do say for many people, transitioning makes more sense just because, complete elimination of fiber, complete elimination of carbohydrates and some other factors can be a bit of a shock to the system. And so once people do, however, go, a couple months in and they've kind of made the transition, they find that they uniquely don't really crave those other foods anymore, which is kind of interesting because a lot of people have problems with cravings, food addictions. And it's not that, eating a slice of pizza is bad. It's when you're eating 10 slices a day, week after week, coupled with cupcakes and sweet drinks and all those things that are so hyper palatable that we, really enjoy eating, but they're just not good for us. They're not very nutritious either. So I think that is, something that tends to happen over time with, anybody that does this. Most people that, they look at it from the outside. If you would ask me, 5 years ago, I'd say, well, that sounds pretty bizarre, pretty crazy. And then, you do it and then you find that, wow, I really don't crave those other foods. I don't need them. And, if we look at different cultures, there are cultural populations that have existed for many millennia, particularly some of these polar climates and the polar-based populations where they don't have access to carbohydrate to any significant degree. They live that way for generation after generation after generation on essentially meat-based diets. They might get a couple seasonal berries here and there, but that's not sustaining them, day in and day out. They're clearly doing it on meat. So that there's historical precedence for that. There's I think evolutionary, a lot of precedence for it. So, it's just, this modern food environment is what we know, but it's certainly not what we knew, even 100 years ago. With the advent of mass transportation, for refrigeration and storage, we've widened our variety, but it's not something that humans have been exposed to for the vast majority of our existence. If you'd have lived in, where you're at now 200 years ago and had to live on what's local to the land, your capacity to eat of a wide variety of food would be very minimal.
When I think about this, you think, okay, and this is what I teach is, for a diet to be successful, any diet, it has to be healthy, it has to get results, and it has to be sustainable, right? So the healthy part, right, we've got the testimonials, there's no long-term studies yet, as with most diets, right? It's obviously getting results. And, again, so the sustainability is the big piece because, and you've said this before, is, hungry people never succeed on a diet. And when you're not having all of those foods that we've come to just crave like crazy. Like for me, it is like red vine licorice. Like I could eat 5 pounds of it. I just have that serious craving, and you're saying that goes away, over time. But, obviously the reason that the vast majority of popular diets, Weight Watchers, whatever you call it, fail is because, we end up going back into the craving cycle and get caught in that loop again. And we don't have the ability, or we don't seem to have the ability to say no or eat in moderation, right? We know that we can eat a piece of pizza or 1 Pop-Tart, but we don't, right? We eat 5 and we eat a box of Pop-Tarts. That's why we're fat. So yeah, I'm just very interested in like the sustainability of this because the principle behind it, makes sense to me. But thinking, shit, I can't eat. I'm going to be eating meat and eggs and for the rest of my life. You're like, God damn, I love to eat salad. I like to eat Pop-Tarts. I like all that stuff.
Yeah, well, like I said, if I trapped you on an island and said, hey, man, this is all you got, you'd just learn to like what you had available to you. The problem is you have an infinite supply of new flavors, taste, colors, shapes, patterns. It never ends. The food industry is never going away. And so it's kind of like, you have to kind of say, where do I draw that line? Some people draw it more broadly than others. But I don't tell anybody this is something for the rest of their life. I'm just like, you do it as long as you want to do it as long as you feel good. And if at some point, you need to add something back in by all means, and just see how you be objective about how it treats you though. And this is the point. It's not to join some religion where you're there for the rest of your life. It's to just say, does this work? Do I feel better? And can I personally sustain it? There's a lot of people for that answer has been yes. A lot of people have, done it for, many, many months to years to 5 years to 10 years to even a couple decades. And so it is sustainable for some people. And I would, like I said, I agree with your point. No diet's successful long-term unless you can sustain it. And I think that, liking what you eat is important. I think not being hungry is important. And if you're hungry all the time or you don't like your food, you're not going to sustain that either. You're going to end up binging on cupcakes and, it's going to be 2:00 in the morning and you're going to be in the, downstairs in the kitchen eating a pint of ice cream, And so, it's just the way it is. And so I think that, time will tell. We clearly have people that have done this for a long period of time, and we've got a study coming out for people that have done it at least 6 months, and I think 6 months is, a pretty decent run for most people that can do that. And I know we've got, now tens of thousands of people that have done it for at least 6 months now, so we can at least say that from a sustainability standpoint.
Yeah, and I've heard from you, from Mark Bell, who we've had him on the show as well, and other people like Joe Rogan, that you're not as hungry. It's not like you have these cravings. Once you start getting adapted, you have your whatever, 6 eggs or your steak for breakfast. You're just not like you're not triggered by like that normal carbohydrate kick where you have a bunch of carbs in the morning and then an hour later you're starving. It's satiating. You've got the protein, you've got the fat, and it's not like you're constantly trying to find ways to eat, which opens up the doors for snacking and picking out junk, right? You have a big healthy meal, and some guys don't eat another meal for 8-10 hours, and you inadvertently are doing some fasting at the same time.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why the diet works. I think one can be caloric reduction. I think not eating constantly is generally a good thing. I think satiety plays a huge role in that. You can kind of try to satiate yourself by eating a real high volume, fiber rich food, which some people would argue is just bloating rather than satiating, but you can satiate yourself with nutrient-dense food like you get in things like steak and eggs. I think the higher protein does provide an advantage. That's pretty clear in the literature. Higher protein diets do seem to have a little bit of protein is not really much of an energy source, so it tends to be a structural macronutrient rather than an energy macronutrient. I think the removal of inflammatory foods, particularly highly processed refined foods, is a huge win, regardless of the diet you're on, whether it's plant-based or meat-based. And so I think all those things, some people do find that a low amount of variety leads to less food consumption. If you're like, I only get to eat these things, and I'm like, well, I'm not excited. I don't eat for non-nutritive reasons, because a lot of us, as just kind of eat to be eating. I mean, it's kind of I'm watching TV, so I got to have something, something going from hand to mouth constantly. And so I think that's clearly a maladaptive, nutrition strategy. And so I think it helps from a number of reasons, whether it causes, some people say it's an elimination diet. It helps with gut symptoms for some people that have those. And we see, a continuous increase in issues like irritable bowel syndrome and gut permeability issues, and then certainly inflammatory bowel disease, which is something completely bigger topic. But those things all seem to be improved by this diet.
Yeah, I've read that quite a few autoimmune diseases or issues, IBS and diabetes, Hashimoto's and celiacs, things like that, are being. I don't know if I say cured, but people are no longer experiencing the symptoms of many of those things, which is a huge win in itself. But you said something a second ago about simplicity and having fewer options, and there's a lot to be said for having a much smaller menu where men, especially men, get overwhelmed. You give them 10, 15 ingredients, they're like, shit, now I have to prepare it and cook it and blah, blah, blah. Whereas you have a very limited menu of, steak, eggs, some fish and whatever. It's you don't have to think about it. And that actually, it does count for a lot. I mean, simplicity works when it comes to this stuff.
Well, yeah, I think when it comes to nutrition, we do tend to make it complicated or overcomplicate something that should be very simple. If we look at any other wild animal on the planet, they don't stress about what they eat. It's not like they require an app to eat. I think the problem is, our food supply is much of it is not really quality nutrition. It's certainly not what we're designed for. I don't care what you think we ate 50,000 years ago. I can guarantee it wasn't Twinkies and Doritos. So we've got that, and then we're trying to figure out how do we manage all this stuff and actually get food we need, and it becomes really complicated. And I think that nutrition shouldn't be. It should be just like any other, physiologic function. I don't need an app to tell me how often to go to the bathroom. I don't need an app to tell me how often to breathe. And so we've got this sort of thing where we've got this situation where we're just not eating the right food, clearly, and it's challenging to make a whole bunch of incorrect foods and try to balance parts of them to try to get enough nutrition, and that's where it becomes challenging.
Yeah. And, for lack of a better term, like dumbing down your diet, I think from a, just a fat loss or a weight loss standpoint, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. We're not worried, oh my God, am I in ketosis? Am I out of ketosis? Can I have this? Am I 2 calories over? Am I, what are my macros? Are they out of whack? I have to track it on MyFitnessPal, right? And that there's a certain, you can talk about the benefits of some of those things, but again, in my experience, I've been doing this for a long time, 23 years in the fitness business. And I see it time and time again, just overcomplicating things leads to quitting. Like I just don't want to do it. It's a pain in the ass. It's easier to do something else, and so I feel like that's something that is a huge benefit of this is you're eating a carnivore diet. That's it. Like that's all there is to it.
Yeah, it makes it pretty easy to define the diet, because you don't have to worry about, is it on plan or not? Is it keto? Is it whatever? Does it fit my macros? How many grams of this and that? And it's very simplified. And a lot of people, they do thrive on that. And, a lot of people will say, even though it's quote unquote restrictive, It's also very freeing and liberating because you just don't have to think about things anymore. And I think that for people that don't want to spend 3 hours a day meal prepping and shopping and planning and calculating and and this and that. I mean, it's sort of a godsend. And I think there's a lot of people. The easiest diet to eat is a standard American diet because you don't have to think, you just eat that. But the results are, we see what the results are, and it's obviously universally bad.
To say it nicely. So where do you come out on counting calories? And I know you just mentioned it a second ago, but in theory, of course, let's say a 120-pound woman wants to, lose 10 pounds, but she decides she's going to just gorge on fatty steaks and eggs and a very high-fat diet, which can lead to eating too many calories, thus putting her in a surplus, making it impossible to lose weight. So where are you at with kind of gauging how many calories you need? Because you don't want to eat too few, where or you don't want to overeat, where you can't lose weight. So, what's your take on kind of counting, or ballparking calories?
I mean, that's when I do a lot of consultations with people, and I think first of all, job one is to fix these sort of food addictions, cravings, and things like that. And so I don't really get into that stuff early on, just because I think it's important to eat to satiety, so what I tell people, eat enough so that you don't want cupcakes. And I mean that works initially, but then clearly, I don't discount the fact that calories are important. I mean, I don't think we defy the laws of physics or anything like that. I do think that protein may give you a little bit of a metabolic advantage. There might be a slight metabolic advantage from low carb diets if you listen to people like David Ludwig, who's 2018 study, I believe, showed, maybe it was 2019, I think it was 2018 though, showed that. But I think that for whatever long-term goal, that we do have to be mindful to some degree of calories. I mean, for most people, eating to satiety on this diet just covers it. They tend not to eat that much, which I think is, that's great. For other people, particularly those that fail to lose weight, I think looking at caloric restriction, either by eating leaner cuts of meat or, maybe reducing your overall volume, does usually work for most people. There's a few people where that doesn't seem to be the case, but for most people it does seem to work. And that, like if somebody's asked me, I've done the carnivore diet, I'm 6 months in, I've come into a weight stall, I've been eating fatty meats to satiety, the first thing I'm likely to tell them is we're not going to cut fat out altogether because that's still a fuel source for you, but we have to kind of dial back on, how much fat you eat, and maybe cycle in fat, periodically, so that you don't tank your hormones, completely, sort of get into a situation where you're not getting enough fat, because fat is still an essential macronutrient, and so we have to have some of that in our diet. So I do think that calories definitely have a big role. I've never been one to say that calories don't matter. Mm-hmm. From an average standpoint, I can tell you what, average guy is going to eat about 2 pounds of meat. Average girl is going to eat about 1.5 pounds, and that's just obviously due to body size and basal metabolic rate for most people. Now, activity is obviously going to play a role in there, and people that eat, train hard are going to eat more. And I think, I'm a big fan of protein. I think protein is underappreciated. I think the RDA is just abysmally low for protein. I think we should be getting more like something like 0.8 to a gram per pound, rather than this 0.8 per kilogram, which is probably half as much as we need. And then as we get older, it seems to go up even higher. And then as we are active, whether we're endurance runners or weightlifters, those are going to raise the requirements likely even further. So I do concern about that stuff. But like I said, for most people, satiety takes care of that for a large percent of people, particularly people that are starting out obese, particularly men for whatever reason. You tell them, hey, give up the carbs, but eat steak and eggs to content. And a lot of guys can, they can do that. They really can. Some of them struggle with, wanting to, snack on sugary stuff. But I mean, for most of them, if you tell them you can, eat steak to your heart's content, that works for a lot of them, at least for a period of time.
Yeah. So, part of the frustration that I have, and I'm not tied to any particular approach to eating. You could find an expert in any particular, diet niche, right? Paleo and whatever. There's a million of them. And if you watch enough of their stuff, you're like, wow, this is the best way to eat, right? And then you go to Barnes & Noble, right? And there's 20 books on 20 different diets. And, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And this guy, he's an MD too. And so obviously we're confused, right? Because there's just so much information, so much misinformation, so much sales-driven information and marketing hype and fitness gurus and trainers and paid celebrities and endorsements. Like, we have no fucking idea what we should be doing, right? And so, we can make a case against or for anything, right? Vegan, carnivore, paleo, right? You're going to find people on both sides, and and I want to hear your thoughts on this, but, what I'll just say is you have to find what works for you personally, and that's it, right? If it's healthy, it works for you, I don't give a shit what it is, eat it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's an approach I largely echo. I mean, I think when we look at nutrition science, I mean, just if you really look at the broad overall, what we know from nutrition science is actually a very poor science. It doesn't, I mean, for those people that want to predict the future, for those people that say, this diet's going to make you live the longest, this diet's going to prevent you from getting, X, Y, Z disease, we really don't have good data on that. I mean, it's all really just weak correlational epidemiologic observation data, which you really can't use to make those decisions. Animal data doesn't really help us that much because there's just too many differences. And then most of the interventional trials in humans are short-term data. I mean, short-term trials, which look at usually things like biomarkers, which are surrogates and don't really, again, tell us what we really want to know, which are the endpoints. Am I going to get this disease or not? And so I look at, if you're healthy and doing fine, keep doing what you're doing. If you're diseased, whether it's obesity or diabetes or, autoimmune disease or arthritis or whatever, whatever diet takes you from that sort of situation into a more healthy situation, I don't care what it is, that is an improvement for you. And if you can stay there in that healthy category, then that's what you need to continue to do as long as possible and be objective about, what you're assessing as health, because what it means to be healthy for one person or a physician even may not be relevant to you. I mean, I don't care. I mean, you can walk into a physician's office and you can say, hey, great, everything looks great, your labs look great, but you literally feel like garbage. I mean, you're depressed, your joints hurt, whatever. That's not a good quality of life. And so I think you've got to look at your quality of life and take that seriously as a serious marker for health. And then, the labs that you get, remember labs, particularly blood work, is very transient. And so it can change from, not only day to day, but even hour to hour. And so we put too much reliance on, what was my lab work on Tuesday, June 7th, 2019, not realizing that on Wednesday, June 8th, it could have been different by 20%. And so it's one of those things where I get a little frustrated when people just want to put everything in the context of a single lab value, which is just, in my view, silly. So we have to look at a holistic view. We have to be very subjective and objective about what it means, and then, do the diet that works for that. And I think that's, I don't know that anybody would disagree with that. I mean, obviously there's people that think their way is the best. I don't know that this is the best. I've never said it. I don't know it's going to make you live longer. I know the only thing I know for sure is I'm wrong about things. I mean, that's I think that's an admission of somebody that's being truthful. And am I going to stay with this diet the rest of my life? I have no idea. Will I modify it? Probably. I probably will. I mean, as things come up and down, I'm going to change, as I need to. And I think that's what we should all do. But I think at the end of the day, we should strive to be, I think there's some things that I think are healthy. I think lean muscle mass, I think absence of, visceral fat, body fat, are good. I mean, you don't have to be shredded. I mean, you don't have to be a bodybuilder walking around at 3% body fat with, ridiculous muscles that, often are there from, drugs and stuff like that. But I do think you need to be functional, fit, active, feel good, absence of disease, absence of pain. And I think those things are, in my view, pretty much optimal health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So is there a time when you meet with somebody or a client for the first time, are there certain populations that or certain people that you would say aren't a good fit for trying this, at least, for a short term?
Well, I mean, I think if you're healthy and you're fine, there's no reason to. I don't, I wouldn't have done it unless I was trying to improve something. And so for me, it was a little bit of that age-related, joint pain and athletic performance. But I think that, the people I typically see are people that are broken. I mean, these are either mostly older people because these are the people that, disease catches up to. But I do get some young guys that are they've got gut issues or, mental health issues or other things that, that they feel that they're having issues with. So if you're 25-year-old that's just killing it, just be mindful, and then just pay attention to how things are going over you. Or if you start having joint pain and inflammation, which you can, you may talk about, well, where can I shift my diet? Do I need to go more meat-based? Do I need to cut out some of these inflammatory foods that might be carbohydrate in nature? There's people that will struggle. I mean, there's certain, obviously people that have problems digesting meat. A lot of it's age-related things. They lose the ability to secrete hydrochloric acid in their stomach, and so it's more challenging. Obviously, there's cultural struggles. There's financial difficulties with it. So I mean, there's definitely people that it may not be the most appropriate thing for. Okay. So I've got kind of a big question for you here, and you alluded to it earlier, but I think at the base of all this, it's and why the diet is a multi-billion-dollar industry is our relationship with food is broken. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and obviously we're on a limited time here and you could talk about this all day probably, but how do we go about, even from the onset of starting to change our relationship with food? Because you can go on any diet short term, right? You could eat nothing but onions for a month, but it doesn't change the psychology behind it, right? So you're going to go running back to your Funyuns and stuff afterwards. What are the first steps in even getting out of that space and able to literally change that relationship with how you view food? Yeah, I mean, I alluded to it earlier. I mean, I think, there's a physiologic component. I mean, obviously, if we're hungry, we'll eat pretty much anything that's available, particularly if we're hungry enough. And I think, so one of the benefits of a carnivorous diet is most people aren't hungry. And we see that with a lot of the fat-based diets, whether it's ketogenic diets or not. So if you're not hungry, you're going to have a little bit more physiologic resistance to breaking in and giving into these cravings, I think that there's a huge psychological component there on top of that. And so if the physiology isn't right, then the psychology, you're never going to, like I said, you can be the most disciplined person in the world, but physiology is going to wear you down over a period of time. So if you're constantly craving stuff, constantly hungry, eventually you're going to give in, you're going to rationalize it, you're going to justify it, you're going to walk by that plate of cupcakes or cookies, 3-4 times, and on that 5th time you're going to say, yeah, I'm just going to have one. And then what happens? You have one, and then pretty soon half the tray is gone.
Yeah.
Looking around to see who's looking at you. And so I think you've got to, like I said, I think a lot of it is, I think most people are malnourished, and I don't mean to say that they're starving and skinny. I think we're just malnourished, and many of us, we have, plenty of calories. We just don't have nourishment. And I think one of the things with this diet, it does sort of give you really concentrated nutrition. It's very bioavailable. It's very, it's appropriate for what our needs are. And I think when you get that, cravings just tend to go away. I mean, that's just, I don't know how else to put it. It just happens that way. And then the psychology is, we eat for, the social pressures are never going away. I mean, unless you become a hermit. But I mean, you're always going to have people that are going to say, "Hey, man, come do this, come do that," and you've got to figure out a way, an adaptive way to sort of do that and still be able to be social. Well, I don't know. Maybe with coronavirus, everybody's going to hide in their homes now. Nobody will go outside, so it might be easier. But I think there's, like I said, there's marketing. The marketing's not going away. The food companies want to sell you food, and they're going to do whatever they can to. And they know it works. I mean, they've been doing this stuff for a long time. They know how to plug into our psychology and how to get you to, whether it's showing you pictures or smells or, trying to convince you that, you need it.
Yeah. So I was going to say, a lot of diets are based on almost like a reward system. And I know we have like this own internal reward system where we feel like, well, if I just eat this way for the next 2 months, then I can have this when I'm done, which is my Krispy Kreme donuts and my all that stuff, right? And with the with the carnivore, that is gone because there's no reward because you're eating another steak, right? And I'm just wondering, if you've had experiences with that where people like to have to look, they want to be able to look forward to something, and and I'm not saying that it's right because you're just basically reinforcing going right back to your old ways, but I've done a lot of diets myself, but I've had a lot of clients where that's how they think is, well, I'm going to do this for 90 days and then I'm going to go back to having all these things that I love. So they look forward to that day that they can go back to eating junk, right? And so, with this, that's missing.
I mean, that's true. I mean, and you can make it there's more variety. I mean, it's not like you just eat nothing but steak. I mean, there's a lot of ways. There's lots of ways you can prepare meat in lots of ways. Some people tolerate different things. And I don't tell people go have a cheat day once a month. I don't tell them that. I mean, some people do anyway. But many people find, particularly if they're dealing with an illness, or like even joint pain. I mean, they remarkably get better, and so when they do go and have those cheat days, they feel it. They feel a dramatic difference, and that's kind of a internally regulating disincentive to do those types of things. And so it's not that they look forward to they don't look forward to those things because they become acutely aware of what those things do to their body and how they feel. So we get that. So I tell people, if you do it for 90 days and then you go back to eating a bunch of junk, and then all of a sudden you do it for 90 days and you feel like you're 20 years younger, and you go back to eating the junk, and within a day you feel your age again. Most people don't want to do that, and it kind of internally rewards them to stay on the diet. So we do have that, and I think it's such a remarkable difference for those people. And that's why you think about it on paper, you're like, well, who would want to eat a restrictive diet for the rest of their life, or even for long periods of time? And yet people do it all the time. I see it day in and day out. I see a lot of people that do what you say. They stay on it for 90 days, they get benefit, they kind of get lured back into their old lifestyle, and then 6 months later they come right back to the carnivore diet, and they're like, well, I just felt so much better. And so I think that's what we're seeing time and time again. And so like I said, at the end of the day, like I said, if you can do a diet like, you do a meat-based diet and you can add a few things that are enough to keep you interested, whatever it is, and you do it infrequently enough or just enough to keep you in the game. Like I said, there's people talk about Pareto principles or, just doing things right most of the time. For some people that works. And one of the nice things, we've got this big study coming out, and I think I'm very happy to say we've got people that are doing the diet 100% strict, but we have people that are doing it 90% strict. And I'd like to see what the difference is in outcomes, because if there's no appreciable difference, then, maybe some people could say I could do a 90% carnivore diet and I'd be happy. And there's a lot of guys that would do that. They'd say, like, I could have, I could eat meat 90% of the time, once a week I'd have a bowl of ice cream. Something like that. And that would be enough to keep them in the game, and they would be 98% better than they were, on a standard American diet, which is, again, this is what we compare everything to. I mean, almost anything's better than that. And then when you get into what one diet is a diet that's the best, I'm not really interested in that conversation, because I think it's just it's a waste of time. I think it's like we talked about find something that you personally can sustain, you personally enjoy, and most importantly, gets you the results you're looking for. And then do that as long as it's sustainable for you, and then make the modifications you need to do.
Yeah, for sure. So, I have a bunch of stuff I want to talk to you about, but I need to be mindful of your time. I know we're on a short clock here, so I want to ask you one more thing. And this kind of blew up in one of my private Facebook groups when that documentary came out, The Game Changers. I had a lot of guys coming out of the woodwork that were like, "Oh, I'm never eating meat again," and it got a little bit ugly. I had to boot a couple guys out of the group for being assholes and like going off the deep end. And I watched your whole video that you did on kind of the rebuttal, and I thought it was really well done. It wasn't like, F those vegetarian vegans. This is point by point. This is why this doesn't make sense. This is what happened. So, could you give us just a quick, 2-minute rundown on kind of the main problem with that? Because, people see that and they think, oh, it has to be true. Look at all these athletes and look at all this research. Meat's terrible. That, vegan or vegetarian is the way to go. And I take everything with, I'm skeptical of everything. So, but I just want to have you kind of share your thoughts for those that haven't or aren't going to watch your, hour-long, video on your rebuttal to this. But I'd love to hear just a few thoughts on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple parts. So looking at the athletes that were in the show, I mean, if we follow them out beyond the short period of time they tracked for them, most of them actually saw a decline in their performance, and many of them end up, hurt, retired, changing careers, no longer competing. And so one of the things we see is, we see a lot of high-level athletes. I mean, just genetically blessed, incredibly strong, fast, ripped-looking guys. Look at guys in the NFL, and we see many of those guys, their diets are just junk food. I mean, they're on standard American diet, and they're thriving. Looking at them from their physical performance, their athleticism. And so when you take those guys and you just remove the junk food, this is what a vegan diet. No one in that film said I went on a vegan diet and I ate Oreo cookies. I mean, that's so. I mean, you're seeing some benefit for there, but I think over the long haul, I mean, we see, over and over again with athletes, they just sort of decline over a period of time. It's 6 months to 18 months for most of them, depending on the sport and the type of activity. There's just countless examples of that. There are some people that do seem to make it longer term, but for the most part, it's not a good diet for athletes. I think that the science that they used, like you said, there is just a tremendous number of studies there. You can use almost any study out there to support your point. I mean, they used a lot of epidemiologic associational studies, which are, again, just not very good studies. They did some quote-unquote experiments, which were very non-scientific, to just kind of show a point they're making, which was just, like the stuff with the vegan meal burrito versus meat-based burrito, and whether they had nocturnal erections or not. I mean, that's just a ridiculous, totally. There's so many confounders into that could have been related to that. The thing with the cloudy blood. I mean, it's just more hype and propaganda, and it's not really, the science out there doesn't support that. Even if the most sort of plant-biased person would say that they can't conclusively say those things. And, even the people that say that the vegan diet is the only diet ever been shown to reverse heart disease. I mean, the diet that Ornish did wasn't even a vegan diet. It was meat. There was meat. There was a low-fat diet that included, fish and lean dairy and some, other meats in there. And so it's really just a lot of propaganda. And you've got to look at the film's producer, James Cameron, the executive producer. I mean, he has $140 million invested in a pea protein, or operations. And so there's, I think we're just seeing a lot of propaganda. I think it's just more of the same. I think this entire vegan movement, while I think the vegans are in it for reasons of they believe they're helping, the animals and perhaps the environment, and even some of them might think it's the most helpful thing, which I don't think it is. It's really taking off because these large alternate meat companies and these processed food companies are seeing the potential for revenue now, and so they're getting behind it, investing in it, and propping up particularly the environmental argument, which is way misrepresented. If we're going to say that we're going to save the planet by not eating meat, it's going to make very little difference, quite honestly, on a global way. I mean, if we're really worried about that, we would be going after fossil fuels in a much heavier way. But that's people say, well, I don't want to give up my car, I'd rather give up meat. And so I mean, it's one of those things that it's whoever screams the loudest, whoever has the most money, whoever gets the best propaganda out there wins. And I think it's clearly just propaganda.
Yeah, that was kind of my thoughts. I'm not against the vegan diet, but more so, like you said, that's exactly what I called it. It's propaganda. So I'm going to link to your video talking about this in the show notes, because I do think people need to see it. But where do you want people to find more about you, what you do?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about meatrx.com. So it's MEATRX, like prescription. So meatrx.com. We've got just a huge platform, lots of resources for people interested in the diet, how to start it, research, environmental issues. There's a coaching product which is very affordable. There's live daily meetings, support groups. We've really expanded on that. We're growing every day. We get experts come in and talk to our community. They can ask questions of the experts, and so we've got that. I mean, I have my books out there, Carnivore Diet, Shawn Baker, MD, which is on Amazon and doing well. And then there's my social media. It's Instagram. It's Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER, 1967. I've got a YouTube channel where I usually put something up most days. Shawn Baker, and then my Twitter is sbaker, which are capitalized, and then or SB capitalized. It's S Baker MD, and there's a capital S, capital B, and then a capital MD. So that's where I'm mostly located. Okay,
yeah, I'll put links to all that because I just think that this is just very interesting to see, and I know a lot of guys are interested in learning more about it. So this has been awesome. Honestly, I could seriously talk to you for another hour, but I know you have to go, and I appreciate your time. You're a very busy guy, so thank you so much for this.
Well, I appreciate talking to your audience, and like I said, hopefully someone will come out and check us out.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, if you want more information, check out the Fit Dad Basecamp group on Facebook. And don't forget to stop by fitdadnation.com. Until next time, keep kicking ass and taking the next step. You can do this, Dad.